Welcome, everyone. We're doing another super exciting episode of Indie Reads Aloud. Why is it super exciting? Well, first of all, I have a really good time. Second of all, we get to listen to really amazing authors read out loud. And thirdly, you get to discover new stories that you can then pass on to everybody you know. So if that's not excitement, I really don't know what is. Today, SW Raine is back to read for us again. She is my good friend, and I get to call her Raine because I'm special. And I'm sure that if you meet her at a signing event, she'll let you call her Raine. I mean, she kind of does, right? You kind of do? Yeah. I am so glad you're back again. You're one of those authors that I'm always torn between. I really hope she hurries up and writes another book. And, oh my gosh, please slow down so I can catch up.
I feel that way about everybody.
So it's kind of cool to be in that space with an author I love, because then I get to just gush and I don't feel badly about it. You know, there's no weirdness about gushing about people you like.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So thanks for coming back again.
Thanks for having me.
For those of you who have not met Raine yet or heard her read, she is Canadian born and raised, and constantly as a child moved between Ontario and Quebec with her military family. She moved to Michigan in 2004, where she currently resides with her amazing husband and spectacular son. I like language. Adjectives are fun.
Yes.
She has always had a vivid imagination and loved reading and writing from a very young age. She took courses in children's literature through ICL in Illinois and published her debut novel, Adult Steampunk Adventure, in 2020. She has participated in NaNoWriMo for, oh my gosh, 18 years. Every time I say it, I just have to like inwardly gasp. I don't know anybody who's done it more years than you have. It's kind of crazy.
Forever.
And she was also a municipal liaison for the Detroit region for 6 years. She has written 3 novels. One is urban fantasy and 2 steampunk, the second of which we'll hear today. I am so excited to have you on the program and to share you with the world. And I just, like I say, when I fall in love with authors, I have a hard time being like low key about it.
I mean, that's good. That's good. And that is why I appreciate you so much, because you're just so
over the top,
I don't even know the
word you're looking for.
Not over the top, not over the top, but you were very like I can't even think of the word right now, but basically just the amount of love you show to indie authors is just amazing. I absolutely love your love for indie authors.
It is that I appreciate that, and it's definitely a passion. I truly believe that the stories we as a community have to tell are equally valuable to the world as any trad author.
Oh, absolutely.
And I just don't think we don't have a platform to scream our voices enough. So this is what my job is. My job is to stand here with a bullhorn and tell the world that indie authors are spectacular, because I've met so many of them that are spectacular. I just can't stay quiet about it.
Right.
So
I love it. And I love
so that. I really appreciate you coming back, and we have such a good time when we go to events together. I'm really pleased that you and I are friends, and that we get to share this wacky adventure, because it's super good. And I gotta say also, it's a really cool, comforting thing to be able to spend time in the company of another author who A, has as many wacky voices inside their head as I do, and B, is just as shameless about sharing them as I am. So that's a really, really cool thing. When we find somebody who is as equally gently schizophrenic as we are, there's a comfort in that.
Yes, I would definitely describe it that way.
Tell me about Techno Mage. Chronologically, it is the second book in the series, but you wrote it first. How did that happen?
I wrote it first. There was, oh my goodness, a long time ago, I used to do online role play. And there was a steampunk one, and I had created my three main characters, which were Ikarim, Arteus, and Magaliana. The role play didn't take off, and I enjoy my characters, so I kind of just shelved them. And then one day, during NaNoWriMo, actually, I got to a point where writing 50,000 words was no longer a challenge. So
I love that about you.
it was no longer a challenge to write 50,000 words in 30 days. So what I did was I decided I was going to write different genres, challenged myself in that. And I decided that I was going to write steampunk. So since I already had those three characters, I was just like, okay, let's grab them and then just like, you know, let them run loose. So then that became a story. And when that became a story, I had one of the Sky Pirate captains. His sole purpose was to get the characters from point A to point B. And unfortunately, I had to give him a name because I couldn't keep calling him the captain, the captain.
Right.
When I gave him a name, he kind of like took off, became leading man. And I had to pull the reins and be like, no, this is not your story. So that's how the spinoff happened.
Which became the first book.
Which became the first book because
it was that
his
history, right?
Yes, in the Techno Mage, he is a well-known and feared sky pirate. So I needed to know how he became that sky pirate.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that you didn't know that when you wrote the Techno Mage. Like you discovered that after the fact. Like one day he sat down with you over a bottle of wine and went, "Okay, let me tell you my story." Right?
It wasn't a bottle of wine, but
yeah. but I just love that concept of Benedict sitting down with you and going, okay, look, you told a great story, but let me give you the history of it.
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool thing.
I have always been one of the people to, and this definitely helps as a pantser. I like to say that I'm just the chronicler of the characters' journeys. Mm-hmm. They take me on their journey and I just follow along and write down what happened. I can't force them to do anything. I learned that the hard way with one of my drafts where my character got bored and by extension I got bored.
Yeah.
So when I, deleted everything, which don't do during Nano, just cross it out.
Yes.
When I deleted everything and said, fine, have at it, do what you want to do. It took me on this whole new adventure that I obviously didn't plan because I'm a pantser, but that's when I realized that, what the characters are, they're the main character. They're the ones telling the story. I'm just writing it.
Yeah, I had a conversation on one of the podcasts that I've done with Mark Love. He writes mysteries. And he said he listens to the characters, watches them do stuff, and simply writes up incident reports.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Which I find remarkable because as a passionate plotter, I don't understand that concept well. I don't specifically design everything, but I have a roadmap.
Yeah.
Right. And the majority of my friends are not that type of writer. They're more like you who just kind of deal with it as it happens. And for me, that's a fascinating thing because it makes you a little bit more gently schizophrenic than I am, which is kind of a fun idea.
Well, especially when the characters are talking to me and telling me their story and I'm just writing it down.
Yeah. Exactly. So today you're going to read from the Techno Mage.
Yes.
I'm super excited to hear you read this. When I read it, I just loved it. And one of the things I love about having authors read their own work is it's like a replay of the book in my head if I've already read it,
Yes.
but it's with all the wonderful embellishments of the author's personal snark, right? So I kind of enjoy reading the books before I hear the author read it, because then I get to relive it with a little bit of the author's brain.
Yeah.
So that's really fun for me. So
Especially when I mean, you know, the people listening to this on Spotify might not see it, but the people watching it on YouTube, you get to watch all my facial expressions as
yeah.
I'm, you know,
Yeah.
as I'm reading, which is
That's super
enjoyable.
fun. That's really
It's
super fun for
enjoyable.
me. So when you are ready, please take the microphone and read aloud.
All right. So I have this is going to start at chapter 17, and it is Magaliana, who is our alchemist, and she is learning from the Techno Mage. All right. Magaliana slowly opened her eyes to the sound of birds chirping. Rays of sunshine cooled all around her as the sun tried to peek past the forest canopy. She was still in the cemetery, and it was just as peaceful and warm as before her slumber. It made her smile. Her eyes found the platter the Techno Mage had left her the previous night. There was barely anything left as the culprits pecked happily at the remainder of the fruit. They were startled away by Magaliana's movements as she stretched, their wings flapping faster than truly necessary. The metal wings that Ikarim had fabricated rested near her head, and her smile faded as gloom set in. "Oh, Ike," she whispered as she shut her teary eyes, hugging her gift tightly. "Art, please come save me." She allowed the warm, salty tears to fall for a moment, but her grief quickly turned to fury. She was separated from her friends and sold to a mythical man. Suddenly, feeling disturbingly filthy in Keenan's shirt, she decided that she would get cleaned up first and foremost. Getting to her feet, she donned her wings and made her way to the lift. Her first stop was the quarters Josephus had loaned her for the time being. She had paid little attention to it before and hoped such a regal suite would at least contain a bath. She slipped past the double doors and quietly shut them behind her. Now she was able to get a better look. It seemed that it might have once been somebody's permanent room. The rug, covers, and drapes were all a mix of dusty rose and white colors, and every wooden piece of furniture, from the bedposts, chiffonier, and even the vanity set, accentuated it perfectly. She made her way to the vanity, where gorgeous pearl necklaces cascaded from the jewelry box and breathtaking agate cameo brooches were scattered on the surface. As she continued to look around, a frame caught her attention atop the chiffonier, and she couldn't help but pick it up to inspect it further. The woman in the portrait was beautiful. She was well posed, like a lady, with her dark hair pulled back in some intricate hairdo beneath a long-brimmed hat that shaded her face from the surrounding sunlight. Her lips were dark. Magaliana could only guess ruby red. "Lady Juliet Beckford," came a voice from behind, startling her. "Daughter of the world-famous alchemist Wilfred Beckford." Magaliana spun around to find Josephus inches away, his attention on the framed photograph. He carefully took it from her, and she put up no fight as she tilted her head, observing him. She had a feeling he personally knew the woman in the portrait. Was this her room? Josephus mouthed a silent, "Oh yes," as he nodded, his eyes still on Lady Juliet. "Did you know her?" "Yes, I do know her." She blinked in surprise. Did that mean Lady Juliet was still alive? Now she was even more curious about the man's reaction. Did Juliet choose someone else over him? Did she leave him? Magaliana slowly and cautiously pulled the frame away from the man lost in thought and set it back on the chiffonier where she had found it. When she turned back around, the mage's eyes were shut. "Joss?" She felt a tinge of compassion for him. Whatever had happened seemed to affect him deeply, and though he claimed to simply be a man awaiting recompense, she briefly wondered if the reward money being offered by her father would aid the lady. Josephus opened his eyes, but it took a few seconds before his distant gaze returned to the present. He gently smiled. "I trust you slept well?" "I did," she answered, weary of the change of subject, rather peacefully, actually. Have you eaten yet? No, I'm not very hungry, she confessed. I would like to wash up, however, if that is all right. Maybe get some new clothes? Of course, he replied, the soft smile still on his lips. He swept an arm in the direction of a side room, and Magaliana stepped inside, slowly and quietly shutting the door behind her. The bathroom was just as luxurious. She ran a hand across the smooth porcelain tiles of the paneled walls as she made her way toward the marbled washstand, her eyes on the encased bath in the middle of the room. She paused at a table where various floral soaps, herbs, salts, and scented oils were lined up behind a vase of wilted flowers. She picked up one of the colorful glass bottles labeled Otto of Roses. She was impressed and also hardly surprised that Lady Juliet would own the costliest of all perfumes. She removed the rubber cap and instantly threw her head back. The scent of the 100-leaved rose was beautiful, but excessively powerful. Her eyes traveled to the thin chemise dresses pristinely folded on the shelf above as she put the bottle back. It seemed that Lady Juliet had everything, except Josephus. What happened? She freshened up at the washstand and returned to the main room to find clothing laid out for her on the bed. She ran her fingers across the silky white shirt, her eyes falling to the iridescent hem ruffles of the bronze-colored skirt. She shook her head. Even Lady Juliet's clothing were as regal as everything else. Magaliana dressed anyway, then sat at the commode and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her dreadlocks were messy and her skin seemed to lack color, which she guessed was from lack of nourishment. She tied her hair in her usual way and stood up to inspect herself once more. The ensemble was gorgeous, but seeing it on her body simply reminded her of all the private events her parents made her attend while introducing her to her suitors. Thankfully, the wings added their own charm and complemented nicely with the clothing. With newfound determination, she walked out of the room. She searched for tools and bottles on every floor, but found none. She was a woman on a mission. If she was to be kept upon the Fogergear for any duration of time, she needed to keep herself busy, and the golems in the cemetery would give her plenty to do. Eventually, she arrived on an unfamiliar floor. She cast the attendant a curious glance as she stepped off the lift, but he said and revealed nothing. The wide hallway was similar to the one that led to the room she stayed in, but the door at the end was much smaller and made of thick steel. Try as she might, she couldn't remember being shown this particular level during her tour. The maddening hum was particularly obvious here, and Magaliana had to grit her teeth to ignore it. She gently placed a palm against the steel and could feel ever so faint vibrations. Trailing her hand down to the intricately carved doorknob, she tentatively turned the handle and pushed. The door opened. She stepped into the room and carefully shut the door behind her, trying to be as quiet as possible. She had a feeling that she wasn't supposed to be there, but something had caught her eye. Glowing green vines were tangled about the wall, ceiling, and floor of the room, which was much, much bigger than the steel door suggested. She inspected some of them and realized that they were tiny wires, much like the ones contained inside the golems, full of green liquid. Unlike those, however, these vines appeared to move, almost as if they were alive. Unsure what to make of them, Magaliana found her way to the center of the room where she'd swear she'd hit the jackpot. Thick wooden tables were filled to the brim with blown glass bottles, containers, and plates of powders. Controlled fires burned in a few jars, and she shivered from excitement. This was her area of expertise. The equipment was more than she had owned in Gesselmeyer's shop and definitely more diverse than what they owned in his house. Enraptured, she inspected every single object until she spotted a figure past the curios with black markings. I'm sorry. Until she spotted a figure past the curios with black markings on his back and shoulders, sitting cross-legged in front of the tall window. Startled, Magaliana took a step back, accidentally bumping her hip into the table and knocking off one of the bottles, which shattered as it hit the floor. She brought both hands up to her mouth, her eyes wide in a mixture of fear and apology. The figure stirred from his meditation. Dame Magaliana. She froze. The person with markings over his body was none other than the Techno Mage, and he knew that she was standing behind him without even turning around. I'm so sorry. She rushed around the table and began picking up some of the shards. The last thing she wanted was to have the mage angry with her. She couldn't risk her upcoming release or even endangering herself. Josephus eventually kneeled near her and carefully flipped her glass-filled hand, allowing the pieces to fall back to the ground. Confused, she met his gaze and swallowed harder than she really meant to. That gentle smile always playing on his lips was so hypnotic. I'll have somebody clean this up. Magaliana quickly glanced away in embarrassment, but her eyes didn't travel far. They shifted to the black markings that stretched over his arms and chest. Does it scare you? He asked as he stood back to his full height. He opened his arms and slowly spun around, inviting her to completely view them. Do they strike fear into your heart? Magaliana gradually got back to her feet, quietly inspecting the markings. She recognized the alchemical formulas and symbols, but there were also various words in many unknown languages, and even animals and objects. Are they supposed to? She stuttered, hesitant. The mage took a step toward Magaliana, and she backed away. He continued to approach her until she was pinned against the table. You tell me, he said rather mischievously. Magaliana's heart raced. She feared for her life, but she was also curious about the markings. She inspected them a little more, especially the formulas, hoping to grasp a concept or two, but none of it immediately made any sense. Her gaze met his once more, and she ever so slightly shook her head. No? Josephus pulled away, returning to his meditation spot and slipping on his silky black shirt. There you have it. You have nothing to fear. Now, what can I do for you? She had practically forgotten why she came to see him to begin with. I would like tools and bottles, please. Josephus raised a brow. Whatever for? I want to fix the golems. A chuckle escaped him. If you're planning your escape, he started, but Magaliana cut him off. I want to fix the golems in the cemetery. Please. She tried again. Josephus seemed pensive. In the very short time she had known him, Magaliana found it rare to see him with a serious expression instead of his usual gentle smile or playful smirk. Nobody's capable of fixing them but me. Please, she begged. You will not permit me to leave, and I don't know how long you'll keep me here. At least allow me a hobby to lose track of time. Please, Joss. Josephus watched her carefully a moment more. She wondered what went through his mind as he seemed to consider her words quite carefully. Very well, I'll have tools brought to the cemetery for you. Grab what you need here. He gestured to the tables. She exhaled with gratitude, her heart fluttering in anticipation. Thank you. She turned to the table and began picking up glass bottles, inspecting them carefully. Her attention was diverted, however, back to the vines by the door. She narrowed her eyes in intrigue. May I ask a question? Of course. What are those vines over there? The green ones. They're unlike anything I've seen. That, my dear, is alchemy, but in a purer form. She raised a brow and shook her head. A purer form of alchemy? She didn't understand how that was possible. Josephus approached the jars of controlled fire. As an alchemist, you are aware that alchemy is an equivalent exchange. You take elements and transform them into their opposite. He covered one of the flames with a lid, then removed it after a few seconds, allowing the smoke to escape. He picked up the jar and tilted it above an empty glass bottle, pouring out a clear liquid. Magaliana had been taught this growing up, though she was thoroughly impressed that the Techno Mage did it all without the aid of the pendulum. You know that fire can turn to water and air, and that air can turn to water and earth. You can get more complicated and say that oxygen turns to hydrogen, lead turns to gold, or you can make it into a purer form. Josephus poured the water in a plate of sand on another table. Magaliana followed closely, curious and observant. He dipped his index finger into the mix and stirred until it was properly absorbed. Then he used both hands to knead the wet sand. Soon it did not look like sand at all, but clay. Magaliana frowned, then glanced about for a pendulum. How are you? The Techno Mage only replied with an amused grin as he molded the clay to look like a miniature golem. Instantly it hardened and turned to brass, then to bronze. The vines grew and wrapped themselves around the statuette, and she wrinkled her nose when green insects emerged, but she was so enthralled she couldn't turn away. He sprinkled a fine crystallized powder onto the figurine, and Magaliana gasped as it began to move on its own. Josephus held his hand out closer for her to see. It was an amazing spectacle, and she couldn't even comprehend how he was doing it. Suddenly, he sandwiched the miniature golem and crushed it, revealing nothing but dust as he pulled his hand away. He poured the dust into the empty glass bottle, and the tiny particles instantly liquefied once inside. Magaliana was speechless. The entire ship, the Fogergear, is built this way. Technology and alchemy merged together. Magic. He corked the bottle and offered it to her. She was reluctant to take it. Magic? More like sorcery. She was convinced that what he had just done was not alchemy. However, she had to admit it was truly fascinating. Magaliana finally accepted the bottle and inspected the green substance that seemed to glow with a life force all its own. May I keep this? To study? Be my guest, he bowed. Excited, Magaliana finished picking through the objects available to her, while Josephus placed them in a wooden pail. With new liquid to study and the promise of tools to keep her occupied, she thanked the mage and made her way back to the cemetery.
Thank you very much. That's a super fun scene. I like that. In steampunk novels, as we just heard, there's this mixture of technology and alchemy, and we talk about magic. Where do you get to draw those lines? Are there in the genre, are there definitive lines where those things intersect, or as the author do you get to define those lines?
It all depends. Because I mean the Victorian age was big on alchemy, but there's a difference between alchemy and magic. So I guess it depends on where you want to take the steampunk, because steampunk, if you like look it up as like as genre specific as you can, it mostly falls under sci-fi. However, you can flip it, like in my case, which I did, and make it more fantasy based. So that's where that magic comes in.
Yeah, so it's heavier on the fantasy and less so on the science.
Yes.
Whereas traditionally it's heavier on the science.
Yes.
So you've now written 2 books in this genre, 2 books in this series. You have a host of characters that you've shared with us already that we've fallen in love with. Who is the character that made themselves known to you that you struggled with giving permission to be on the page? What was the character where you said, you know, I don't like you so much, and I'm not real sure I want you to be in these books? Who was that character, and what was it about them that you had to struggle with to put them on the page?
Well, there is one of Magaliana's suitors.
Okay.
I first of all couldn't stand the idea of suitors to begin with. And the fact that she just like turns them all down anyway. But there was this one suitor who was just like adamant about helping. And you know, at first she was like, well, I don't trust you, that you don't have some sort of ulterior motive to like, you know, try and you know, win my favor some more. And he's all like, no, I truly do want to help. But I didn't like him. I really didn't. So he meets an unfortunate end. But I did have a hard time with him.
So was his unfortunate end fun for you to write?
It was.
Or did you struggle with it?
No, it was fun. It was fun because I'm like, oh good, you're dead. Okay, now we can move on.
Yeah. I no longer have you nagging at me. This is good.
Exactly.
Yeah. Much better. Very cool. What is up next for you? Are you writing another book in this series? Are you writing another book in the Elemental series? What are you writing, something brand new? What's next?
Well, so when I was working with my author coach, we set up a 5-year plan. And
so you can plan when you need to.
I mean, it's not necessarily that kind of plan. This is a what can I get out? How can I make money?
Sure.
You know, that type of plan. So we made a 5-year plan, and because I had already written 2 steampunk books and was working on the urban fantasy, only because as a pantser, I couldn't figure out what was happening next with Keenan's story. So I decided that since I am a steampunk and urban fantasy author, that I already had 2 steampunk books out, and I would finish the urban fantasy trilogy before moving back to steampunk.
Okay. So you have 2
So,
more in the urban fantasy coming out.
yes, I have part 2 and part 3 of the trilogy. Part 2, if I can ever get over the edits, I do plan on releasing it in the spring.
Okay.
Part 3, I'm going to do the complete rewrite for NaNoWriMo. And then, because Rise of the Sky Pirate is the first in the Adventures of Captain Keenan series, I think it's time for me to kick my pants or butt into gear and actually like finish a series. We'll see how well that works. I don't know.
Well, but right now the 2 books living as a duology works very well.
It does. It does.
I mean, it doesn't feel missing or incomplete, which is nice. But
Yeah.
if you have more story to tell, I'd be willing to read that.
Yes. And what had happened was the Techno Mage, when I originally wrote it, it had always intended on being a standalone. And then obviously I had the spin-off because, you know, I fell in love with Keenan, and I needed to know, you know, what happened to make him become this, you know, big sky pirate.
Sure.
But I was talking with a friend, and this friend said, but wait, you have this potential to make this world so much bigger, because in the Techno Mage, and you can see a bit of it in Rise of the Sky Pirate too, but in the Techno Mage, you see that I have 3 factions. I have the Sky Pirates, who are the evil. I have the military faction, which is the good. And then you have the rogues, and the rogues are they work for whoever pays more.
A little both, yeah.
They're the neutral territory.
Yeah.
So
although not always so neutral.
Not always neutral, but they are the you know, they're not evil like the Sky Pirates, and they're not, you know, good like the military. They have their own code thing going on. But so she said that because I have the spin-off with Keenan, I could potentially have a spin-off with the military and a spin-off with the rogues, and then pull that all together for a Techno Mage 2. And then my mind went, oh my goodness, I could totally do this. As a pantser, we'll see. Yeah. But because obviously this sounds good in theory, it's when it comes to writing it, that's an entirely different story. So who knows?
Well, what fun. I think that's going to be great. I mean, yeah. And if you decide that you want to jump off and do a completely different genre, I'll still follow you, because I think you're a spectacular storyteller.
Thank you.
So I appreciate you coming on the program. Thank you so much for sharing your work. And please let me know when the book comes out in the spring so we can have you back again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.